3 months ago, my life took a strange turn. I was living in Brooklyn, working in real estate. My job was decent, but it didn't excite me much anymore. I had been thinking about making a career change for a while, and recently, I had been reaching out to my family in Virginia for advice. I hadn't been close to them over the years. When I was 19, I had moved away from Virginia Beach to New York City, and since then, I had barely kept in touch with anyone from back home. Now, at 32, so much had changed. My parents and I had drifted apart, and my contact with other relatives was minimal. The events of this story felt even more surreal because of how disconnected I had become. One afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call from my cousin. Let's call him Mike. Mike was about 8 years younger than me. When I lived with his family in Georgia for a year, I was 16, and he was just 8. We didn't have a strong bond back then due to our age difference. After moving back north, I hadn't seen him again. Our family didn't have many reunions or gatherings, making it easy to lose touch with extended family members. When Mike called me, I was genuinely surprised. I didn't even know he had my phone number, so it took me a moment to recognize his voice. He explained that he wanted to come visit me in New York for a week. I was intrigued and happy at the prospect of catching up with him. I was curious to see how much he had changed over the years. A couple of weeks later, I got my answer. I picked Mike up at LaGuardia Airport. As I waited at the arrivals gate, I felt a bit embarrassed because I wasn't sure what he looked like now. I remembered him as a child, but now he was a grown man. When I finally saw him, he was much taller than I remembered, with a muscular build and a handsome face. I felt a bit intimidated, but Mike's friendly demeanor quickly put me at ease. He seemed genuinely excited to be visiting. The moment we got to my car, it became clear that Mike was ready to have a good time. I enjoy going out, but Mike's enthusiasm was on a different level. That first night, we hit several bars and clubs, staying out until around 3 a.m. We talked about a variety of topics, but I noticed he was quite evasive when I asked about his life. It seemed like he was running away from something, but he wouldn't share any details. I didn't press him for answers, respecting his privacy. Mike's attention was often diverted by women he met during the night. He was charming and seemed to have an almost magnetic appeal. I decided to head home while he continued socializing, making sure he knew how to get back to my place. I stopped by a pizzeria on my way home, enjoying a late-night snack before heading back to my apartment. I checked the guest room to see if Mike had returned, but his luggage was the only thing there. It was nearly 5 a.m., and I needed to be up early for some important calls, so I went to sleep. I don't recall falling asleep, but I woke up around 7 a.m. to some unsettling sounds. It was a mix of muffled screams and grunts, not loud but disturbing enough to break the silence of my apartment. The sound seemed to fluctuate between pleasure and intense action. It was really annoying because I couldn't get any rest. I lay in bed, trying to make sense of it, until 9 a.m., when Mike finally came into the apartment. He looked disheveled but seemed pleased with himself. He told me he had just returned and had a great night out. He wasn't around when the strange noises occurred, which confused me because they had clearly come from inside my apartment. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it might be loud neighbors, but their noises never sounded like they were coming from inside. I decided to chalk it up to being overly tired and possibly hearing things. However, I noticed Mike looked very dirty, as if he had been rolling around in the dirt. When I asked him about it, he simply said, "It got pretty wild last night." I laughed it off and let him go to the bedroom to rest. He didn't sleep much that day. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud gasp coming from Mike's room, as if someone had just woken up from a nightmare. I listened for a while and then heard footsteps and mumbling. Mike was talking to himself in a strange and unsettling way. This went on for about 30 minutes before he came out, looking unusually moody. I asked him if everything was okay, but he got unexpectedly angry and defensive. His outburst made me uncomfortable. Then, just as suddenly, he apologized sincerely. In retrospect, I probably should have been more alarmed, but at the time, I was mostly confused. I didn't know Mike well enough to understand his behavior, so I tried to stay open-minded. Later, his mood changed drastically when I suggested going out again. He went from being somber to extremely happy, which made me wonder if he might have bipolar disorder. We went out again that night. As usual, Mike attracted a lot of attention from women. I didn't stay out too late and returned home by midnight. I fell asleep quickly, only to be awakened for the second night in a row by loud banging noises coming from the living room around 6 a.m. It sounded like someone was breaking in. I grabbed my gun and went to check, my heart racing with fear. When I opened my bedroom door, the noise suddenly stopped. I turned on the light and cautiously made my way to the living room, gun in hand. To my shock, I found Mike sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, completely unfazed by the commotion. Mike looked disheveled again. When he saw me, his expression quickly shifted from troubled to normal. He seemed disturbed, but not by me. I was more concerned about the noise I'd heard, but Mike said he hadn't heard anything and had been sitting in the dark living room for about an hour. Everything seemed in order, but I was starting to worry about my own sanity. I got Mike to go back to bed and decided to get some good rest until noon. When I woke up, I was startled to find a woman I didn't recognize sitting at the edge of my bed. She was pretty, petite, and looked worried as she stared at me while I slept. I was taken aback, but she didn't seem frightened. A few moments later, Mike burst into the room and told the woman to leave. She looked terrified and hurried out. Mike later introduced her as Lisa, saying she had been around for the rest of his visit. Lisa was always quiet and appeared afraid of Mike, who was often irritable around her. 2 days after Lisa's arrival, on the 4th day of Mike's visit, I was abruptly woken up in the middle of the night by Mike screaming at Lisa. I rushed to the living room and found Mike standing over Lisa, who was curled up on the floor and seemed to be in pain. Mike's rage was terrifying, and I froze in fear. In an instant, his anger vanished, and he returned to his normal self. He apologized, picked Lisa up gently, and said he would leave so I could get some rest. I regretted not calling the police, but I was concerned for Lisa and Mike. I wasn't sure what Mike was capable of, or if Lisa would be okay. After that night, Mike and Lisa disappeared for 2 days. Mike wasn't answering my calls, and I was very worried. I eventually contacted the police and reported Mike as missing. They informed me that, as an adult, their options were limited, but they would do what they could. On the last day of Mike's visit, he returned to the apartment. His behavior was odd. He didn't explain where he had been or why he had ignored my calls. He packed up his belongings, hugged me, and said he didn't need a ride to the airport. I had many questions, but he avoided most of them. When I asked about Lisa, he simply said, "She's better off," and left. An hour after Mike departed, my mom called with urgent news. Before she could tell me, I shared the strange events of the past week with her. After listening, my mom was silent for a moment before saying something that still haunts me. She said, "That's impossible." I was frustrated and asked her why. She revealed that Mike had been in a coma 2 weeks before his visit and had passed away on the same day he was supposed to see me. His family had been with him during his final days. The situation got even more chilling. Mike was being investigated for the disappearances of several women in Atlanta, including Lisa. I felt sick to my stomach and terrified. I asked my mom to send me a recent photo of Mike when he was healthy, and the person I had spent the week with looked exactly like the person in the photo. I retraced everything from that week, trying to find anyone who might have seen us. I visited bars and clubs, spoke to bartenders, and none of them remembered us. I even contacted some of the women Mike had interacted with, but none of them recalled meeting either of us. I tried to find Lisa, but she was still missing and had not been found. Since then, I've been in therapy trying to understand what happened. My mom believes I might have had a spiritual connection that revealed to me what Mike did. I'm still grappling with the reality of the situation, trying to determine if what I experienced was real or just a figment of my imagination.